espresso. I'm So, and this will be a reading of The Drakes Spoiled Brat, I'm Sorry Dad, by Yellow Sprouts on AO3. Summary. Tim Drake died at 17, his family long broken beyond repair, a cuckoo finally rid from the nest. But when he wakes up in his time, just a year after the Graysons' death and appearance of the first Robin, Tim would let his family suffer again, even if it meant he couldn't join them. Bruce Wayne is not Brucie Wayne. Tim Drake is not Timothy Drake. They are both personas, a front to prevent people from looking at what's really under the surface. But sooner or later, Tim should have known Gotham being a city of secrets. Nothing stays buried forever, especially not when the bats get involved with their trashy next-door neighbor whose behavior seems more and more contradictory. Tim had saved them all more times than he could count. Maybe this time they could return the favor. Forewarning from the author, this fic is very worldly slow burn, but every line is crafted with love, and if you decide to continue, I certainly hope you enjoy it. Chapter 1. The Schrödinger Boy. Tim stared down at his cup, acutely aware no matter how hard he tried, the alcohol inside would never go completely still. His hand was constantly adjusting, accommodating, and with every movement another wave of ripples would cross the surface, bouncing against the walls before settling enough and beginning the cycle again. A woman caught his gaze, her cheeks already far too flushed for the fact the gala had only just begun. Miss Astor, a stout brunette in a bright and all too short pink gown, half stumbling as she walked. Tim smiled and waved, holding his cup in the air as a polite greeting. Miss Astor lifted her glass in turn before making a beeline for Mr. Van Dyke, old money oil tycoon and a well-known cheater in the right circles. Even from this distance, the tan line of her wedding ring was still visible. Tragic, if she wasn't already on the impressive 4-time widow at 58. Well, less so when all her husbands were already waist deep in the grave. They deserved each other. Timothy snipped in the cup and did his best not to wince at the bitter taste. He never could get accustomed, but taste didn't matter much once he got buzzed enough not to care. His Bruce would be furious at him, getting drunk at the party at only 17. But that wasn't his Bruce anymore. Well, it was no one's fault but his own. It had been years since Time's team incident, years since he considered Dwayne's family. Red Robin ended up on a mission in Siberia while following a lead connected to a weapons deal within Gotham. What should have been a simple mission blew up far out of his control. Safe houses compromised, supply destroyed, contacts turned sour. And the cherry on top? His boo staff snapped in half after he nearly got run over by a truck. And that has been his backup stuff. There was no backup, weapons, or comrades. Red Robin flew solo. Everyone knew that. So did the silhouette, who held a gun at almost point-blank range aimed directly for his heart. His memories were fuzzy at best, non-existent at worst. But he remembers the gun. You don't grow up in Gotham and not know guns. But this one? It was nothing like he's seen. Unfortunately, hard to analyze, as he felt the searing energy rip straight through his chest and send him crumbling to the snow bank below. He laid and watched as the figure fled into the distance, the snow consuming them. Tim was dying, he knew that. They say the whole life flashes before your eyes, but at that moment he didn't get a whole movie montage. He just felt the weight of so many years finally come down to this. Not in a lucky assassination or a battle of wills against an arch enemy, not a blaze of glory sacrificing himself in the end for those he loved. No, Tim was alone, dying because he was so unprepared, and his tendency to push everyone away finally bit him in the ass. Alone in the start, and alone in the end. What a fucking joke. You'd think dying with a gaping hole in one chest would be faster than this. But even as minutes ticked by, his mind was painfully aware of every millisecond passed. His limbs were numb, bloodless probably, or maybe that was the fact that he was bleeding out in a giant pile of snow. Either way, the pain had slowly ebbed away, but things got fuzzier. It would be soon then. God, as selfish as it was, Tim wished, in that moment, his family was still whole. Even if they were too late, they would still have come. How long until they realized he was gone? Or would they assume he finally did them all a favor and went dark for good? Would he get a grave? What would it even say? He lies Timothy Jackson Drake, friend. He wasn't a great one. Brother, only by law. And son, not anymore, and not for a long time. At least, if he did get a funeral, he wished that in his death their fucked up family would be all together again. Hell, maybe it would be the catalyst of everyone else making amends. But I was a bit too presumptuous of his place. Fuck, if that were the case, it would be worth it. For a moment he felt something. A flash of light, a melodic music sound, a voice, and the feeling of something settling in his chest. But Tim felt his mind receding, and before he could register anything else, he was engulfed in darkness. Thus marked the uneventful end of Tim Drake. Or well, it should have been. But life has a tendency of never giving him an easy way out. Apparently his death was no different. Tim hasn't expected to wake up, less so without a smidge of pain. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. He was warm too, tucked tightly into the layers of soft blankets. Was this heaven? Did he really deserve that? A warm bed and painless existence? Guess he done something right. His gaze focused just ahead, and he froze. They were plastic stars, plastered on the ceiling. The same stars he begged his mom to get, despite what it would do to their home value, hung just above his head. Tim was in his bedroom, his old bedroom. The only thought running through his mind, one simple word: fuck. It didn't take too long to accept this new reality. No, he wasn't in an alternative dimension, nor did he switch spots with another Tim Drake, nor was this some weird reincarnation. Working theory, he slipped back in time, his time, possibly triggered by whatever he'd been shot with. Bart had ranted about time slips more than once, and it seemed Tim was just lucky. Some luck it felt like, forced to do number trains while dealing with the existential crisis of knowing what was to come, the horrors his family had yet to experience. But he couldn't interfere, right? It started small. Tim stopped spending all his night wallowing. Instead, he scoured every inch of Crime Valley, searching. It didn't take long. The few times Jason had opened up about his past before B were enough for Tim to track him down. Jason had skimmed over a lot of details of his living, and was enough that Tim had to go hide in a fire escape to sob his eyes out before he was ready to reassess the situation. Stupid kid's brain. He may have his memories, but it seems his hormones and his pain tolerance had reset, which he learned the hard way. Besides, was it stealing if it already belonged to his family? And if he could slip a whole Batmobile in a Batarang budget for someone as paranoid as Batman, try saying that 10 times fast. He could slip the cost of some new clothing and comforters to his parents' account. Tim began leaving packages, random necessities or food, hiding random treats in cabinets and drawers. It wasn't much, but Tim had still paranoid about messing with too much just in case his theory was wrong. He couldn't save him from everything, but he couldn't just leave his brother suffering for so long. Despite it all, Jason, just a few inch taller and a few less scars, he still took the tires. He joined the family. And Tim watched from afar. Some days were hard, days where his parents' goodbye were a bit too bitter, knowing the promises of a quick return were empty, and the family he'd grown to love was just next door. But they were better off without him, and he knew it would be game over if any of them ever found out about him. The temptation was just too much. So he took some inspiration from dear old dad and created his own version of Brucie Wayne. But instead of a well-meaning but ditzy Prince of Gotham, Tim became a menace. He embraced every gripping stereotype that Jason and other Gotham natives had ever believed, taking inspiration from people like Miss Astor, people that Tim would prefer chopping his arm off than spending more than a few hours with. Timothy Drake was loud. He was snobby. He never hesitated to complain about anything, and every minor inconvenience was a threat to sue. Timothy Drake only wore the best, only talked to those he deemed worthy company, and sneered at the rest. Timothy Drake gained a reputation. No one bothered as much with the street rat Mr. Wayne had taken in when they had the bratty demon from the hell next door. It was perfect. But he was his own worst enemy. He tried, but the more he watched his city suffer, the harder it was to keep away from the call he knew. Tim stayed in the shadows at first, leaving tips on the desk of the GCPD and even to Batman himself. But he resisted, picking up a mask. He couldn't justify the risk. Red Robin was dead, and he needed to stay that way. Even without a mask, he had another name. A name given for the unknown informant who seemed to know all and yet seek nothing in return, eluding even the bad. They dubbed him after the little red paperclips he put on every file he put into place, and small bird doodle he forgotten to erase. At least they were keeping with the theme of birds in Gotham. Never did he claim the name, at least not then. Instead, he continued pushing the boundaries of what he could get away with, though he did let some dead dogs lie, so to speak. He didn't intervene with Diggs and be whole blow up. They would sort out themselves. Besides, the world deserved Nightwing, and Dick deserved the freedom he got away from Gotham. The call grew stronger after Bab's attack. He only lessened and delayed it, but the failure was still dead. Seeing her walking cane at public events only made the pit in his chest grow. Badger still died, because he was too weak to step in himself. Even then, Tim was still set on staying away. But with Dick and Bruce still at each other's throats, Gordon and Alfred already overwhelmed with it all, and Jason seeming to outgrow Bruce's iron grip every day, he couldn't stand in the idea of Babs being so alone in that dim tower. So, in a moment of weakness, he left a gift and a note from Cardinal, a bird of devotion, a homage and a reminder of his mission. It served a sliver of connection to the family he once had. It was euphoric. Despite his failures, despite the suits and the tech he had stashed away, since too long a glance was already too much, Tim managed to stay strong in his refusal. Of course, that all changed when April came around. Tim would be damned if he allowed Jason the word fate. He would not fail again, even if it meant there was no longer a need for a replacement, a need for Tim. He pulled together a profile on Shayla, along with hundreds of other Joker-confirmed associates worldwide. Save the trouble in the future. It was left on the commissioner's desk in the same way it always had. Only now it was signed in bright red ink. Cardinal. To no one's surprise, Batman had come through every single name. He found Shayla among them. It should have been over then. But Jason, as lovingly stubborn as he wasn't satisfied with a simple no. Something went wrong, horribly wrong, but enough that despite his every reservation, despite every instinct screaming at him how bad of an idea it was, Cardinal was given a face. In the end, Robin still died. But Jason Todd lived. Tim never found out everything that happened, fleeing before the smoke could settle and question could be asked. The public story was a tragedy of a broken boy recovered by the bat and returned to the father. The family granted privacy to recover after the international order. And about a year later, Blue Jay appeared, a blonde robin tailing just behind. Cardinal continued to work behind the scenes, but from the moment he gave in, Tim knew he'll give in to it all. slowly spreading their wings until they gained a reputation of their own in the streets. In Gotham, they became a critical source of almost omnipotent level information to the bats. People were arrested, disaster prevented, and organizations destroyed long before they could come to fruition. The only group he left alone was the League, that wanted to touch that mess if he could help it. And he didn't want to make things any more dangerous for Damien, though he did keep tabs, same with Lady Shiva and David Kane. It was shaky work, choosing what events to allow and which ones to stop. But he couldn't beat Luther to death when Connor hasn't been born yet. And let the light develop just enough, Bart appeared, and then he could stamp it out. By some miracle, it worked. The Thomases were saved, and Duke seemed to be doing well. Though Tim had left him be, he never really knew him anyways. Step and Cass has joined the family through hundreds of carefully pulled strings and circumstances. Batgirl and Spoiler made their own legacies, with Steph returning to her original moniker, first Robin, now Batgirl, instead handing over yet another legacy title to a new sibling. That last piece was arguably the most challenging of them all, but with all other safe options expanded, he bit the bullet and reached out to Dahlia. She has been, understandably, uncooperative.
Look, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust your instincts.
And what, pray tell, are my instincts meant to be telling me? Dahlia practically purred over the phone.
Ra's hunger for power is insatiable. He will see Damien as he sees you, an asset to his grand mission, and if Damien fails...
He will not fail. Dahlia hissed with so much venom, Tim flinched back. He had to pull away from the voice modifier for a breath long enough to resent himself. Weakness to an old ghoul was far from worthy of trust, and that was just what he needed.
By your standards, no. But he is as much a bat as he is you, and the strength of a Black Knight is a weakness to a ruthless assassin.
Tim glanced at the water over the edge of the yacht and planned to chuck the phone over soon enough. Anyone who knew Damien's true parentage was a threat, but it was a card he needed to show.
Now, I ask again, will you be able to protect him against your father?
She hung up. Damien appeared at the manor by the time Timothy returned from his cruise. That was several years ago. Batman, Nightwing, Oracle, Bluejay, Batgirl, Spoiler, and Robin. All the bats had their place now, and the shoebox of photos had grown into an entire secret room. Was it creepy? Yes, but it was also the best he got to see his family. Also yes, that, and he didn't have to worry about being discovered. By the time Tim was 17 yet again, he hadn't been able to save his parents, not escaping the fate of the youngest CEO when he took over Drake Industries. Timothy Drake was a spoiled brat, or a battalion child to pity, who was only the face of the company for the tabloids and the namesake. They assumed the charity that sometimes topped even the Waynes, where was the thankless work of his lackeys. Only 2 people were in the know about Tim. Leslie Tompkins. She didn't know about his past, just that he wasn't the same spoiled brat the Bible portrayed. He was sure of that. It did help with advancing medical care in Gotham, though through her clinic, jointly founded by Wayne Industries, of course. But she also gave advice on measures that the WE overlooked and the I could help in. And Lucius Fox. Tim had swapped him from the WE. He tried the same with Tam, but in this timeline she moved to Europe in college instead. It was probably better that way. But if he wanted to remain Timothy Drake while still having Drake interesting function, he needed at least one other competent person. He was really appreciated. Though at this point he was confident Lucius just thought he was fucking weird and that his full asshole persona was a defense mechanism from his childhood trauma, which was rude. But he was half the reason Tim stayed sane, so it was worth it. The downside of having a good relationship with his right-hand man was the fact he couldn't play the hangover after a wild rich kid rager of someone's yacht card every time he wanted to skip an event. Even worse, this was an event hosted by the Waynes, which, despite hating his guts, had to invite him out of courtesy after the latest program collaboration that introduced the free vital medication to Crime Alley and other low-income areas of Gotham. Lucius had given him a glare that rivaled Alfred's when he tried making his case for bailing. Unfortunately, knowing Tim wasn't nearly as reckless as Timothy worked against him at times. Hell, one of the only bonuses of Timothy was that Tim wasn't new to galas in general. Usually it was acceptable for younger kids not to attend, though Tim was, of course, always the exception for his parents. But the fact it was hosted at a Wayne manor meant that Tim in prison was not only expected, but also practically required to avoid any baseless rumors from floating around. Tim glanced down his cup, which was now disappointingly empty. He always felt a wisp of a pleasant past, but he didn't want to deal with being seen walking around with an empty glass. Weaving past the crowd, he had a few polite smiles and of course some well-timed snobby comments and sneers. Tim ignored the sensation of an especially glaring pair of eyes as he reached one of the servers, snapping his fingers, making them rush forward to swap his cup with a now filled one. Casually, he scanned the hall and met the eyes, none other than Jason Todd, who sneered. Timothy would have sneered back, but Tim couldn't bring himself to do it. Only thing Tim could never bring himself to do was flunk glasses. Sure, he was disrespectful and might have skipped here and there, but he never failed. So he happened to still be kicking a few grades ahead in Gotham Academy, in Jason's grade. Tim had gotten careless then, but he knew to never make the same mistake again, and now he paid the price. Tim rolled his shoulder back. Timothy maintained Jason's eyeline, waving exaggeratedly as he walked over to the Wayne boys, a savory smile on his face. "Ah, If it isn't Dwayne's, my say lovely party so far. Tim projected his voice, letting his Bristol accent full force the point it bordered on ear grating. Jason looked like he wanted to deck Tim for existing, and Damien looked similarly murderous. Dick, however, ever the actor, had just a moment where his eyes darkened. Imperceptible to anyone, but not a Bat, of course. Then he switched to a blinding smile. Timothy Drake, glad to see you are enjoying yourself, though I swore you're not of legal age just yet. Dick smiled, gesturing to Tim's now half-empty champagne glass. Timothy only smirked and held it up slightly. Oh, I'm not, but it would be rude to deny an esteemed guest good booze, wouldn't it, Officer Grayson? He took another obnoxious long sip while maintaining eye contact. Dick's eyebrow twitched. It's actually firefighter now. I only had the honor of serving on the force for a few months before I quit. Quit? More like he almost got killed by his fellow officers after exposing a giant corruption scheme. Not that Timothy knew that though. But still, he couldn't take the bait. Tim needed some sort of scene. Damien didn't really know him yet. They made sure to keep Timothy far away from baby Wayne. The last thing he needed was the brat getting curious. That and a scene would mean a damn good excuse to bail. Now then, glad to hear that we had marched Drake Industry in donation for, what was it again? Tim said looking to the side. Right, he snapped his fingers. Medical stuff for the people who can afford it. Such a noble cause, don't you agree? Dick's smile was now very much strained, and Jason tensed even more, but not enough yet. Say, you used to live among the everyday folk downtown, didn't you, Jason? Tim smiled, though the words fell like razor blades up his throat. I did, Jason spat, his hands slowly curling into fists at his side. Tim hummed, taking another long, languid sip. Just enough it was bordering on disrespect. Then again, Timothy would never respect Jason, so it worked. Then I imagine you were especially grateful for the noble sacrifice to your kind of people. In that instance, he would have sworn Jason's eye flashed green. And yet he knew better. They stayed their natural baby blue, but were so filled with familiar rage it hardly made a difference. Though you likely had a big part in convincing your father, so for that I must be thankful for the opportunity. Tim bowed his head, both in a desperate attempt to break eye contact and as a cherry on top of pissing Jason off. Timothy always bordered on a line of infuriating, but just subtle enough you couldn't call him out on it. Some tried, and they proceeded to have to keep up with the verbal gymnastic that would keep even the Riddler spinning. Most people would have been forced to play nice, and would just find a polite excuse to bail and then complain to the nearest person in earshot. Hell, if Jason did him a favor of being a bit too loud, Tim could probably leave by midnight. But Jason, ever the unpredictable asshole, seemed to have no qualms about playing nice. He didn't yell at Tim, but quickly stormed off, muttering under his breath all the way and almost ramming into several socialists. so shall it is. Dick was quick to follow, apologizing to a few scaffy old crows that continued to glare at Jason as it disappeared from view. Mission success. God, he missed real missions. This just sucked. Tim glanced down at his watch. A Rolex that used to be his dad's. Only 10:30. Sooner than expected, he took another sip of the glance and glared at the fact it was already running low. Well, now he could feel a buzz. Curse his low tolerance, he need to slow down to keep pace all night. So, Drake, are you an associate of my father? Damien said, his arms are crossed, and one of his bad brows raised high. Tim had to thank years of practice acting for the fact that he didn't speak out his drink and jump a foot in the air. Why the fuck was he still there? Why, yes, and you're the littlest Wayne, the bio child. Timothy smiled. Damien seemed annoyingly unfazed by the little comment and just nodded. Damien Wayne, yes, and I'll be taking over your father's company, so we'll be associated in the future. Is that so? This was new. What angle was Damien going for here? Then I hope you grow big enough for your britches in time. Damien's face screwed up a bit. Fuck, that was sort of slang. Damn it, Con. He could pass it off as being drunk and well-traveled, surely. That being said, Father may see you as a worthy asset, and while I see the appeal of strong gun allies, they mean nothing in the face of utter disrespect. What do you mean? Don't play call with me, Drake. Damien spat in an oh-so-familiar tone. If you do not cease your venom-filled words towards my brother, I will be forced to make you. Damien stepped forward, purposely anchoring on Timothy's personal space with a glare that rivaled Batman himself. Normal men would cower. Tim had to remember to let a little fear slip through. This is your one and only warning. Control your tongue or lose it. Damien said, and remained far too close to Timothy for a few seconds too long before pulling away. Now I'm better off to find better company. He left. Damn it. Dick was a fucking infection, making him feel proud of the Brat being so protective. But God, his Damien would sooner die than call any of them his brothers, let alone stick up for them off field. He come so far. How dare the little shit make him feel proud? Tim checked his phone, ready to call an Uber, but instead was greeted with a text that made him want to scream. Foxman. I swear to God, if you bail, I will give you paperwork duty for a month, and I will stop delaying the meeting with Mr. Isbell. Well, fuck. Tim was far too sober for this. Outer notes. Damien. Threatens seriously bodily harm and means it. Tim. Internally. Yeah, you better tell me. No one gets to be nasty to our brothers. Timothy. I could sue you for this. Thank you for listening. This was chapter 1. This will be another long fic, so we have 3 series that will be coming out, which I hope you will all check out. Have a nice day or night.